Hi everyone, this is Eugene Popa, and I'm very excited that you're watching this video because it means you're interested about hypnosis and you're interested about, Ericksonian hypnosis in particular. And we are super excited because right now I have with us, Richard Hill, who is very masterful, and he'll tell you exactly why he's so masterful. And he has an amazing technique that he'd like to share with you, and also, of course, would like to invite you to his special one-of-a-kind training where you'll get to the bits and pieces, to the nuts and bolts of this method, and you can start applying it for yourself and with your clients. So I'm gonna hand it over to Richard Hill now to say a few words about himself, so you get to know him and you will discover then why you really would want to learn from him. So Richard, thank you so much for being here with us today. And I know it's very late for you. What is your time right now?
No, it actually is not too bad. It's early evening. It's about 5 o'clock in the
Ah,
afternoon.
all
So it's
right.
very
Yeah.
good. But I do find that quite often when I'm working, because I live in fabulous, wonderful, extraordinarily marvelous Australia, that the price I have to pay is that I spend a lot of time up at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning
Yeah.
talking to people. But you get used to it. I've been doing this for a long time. I was president of an organization about interpersonal neurobiology for quite a few years. So for 7 or
Yeah.
8 years, I got up at 3:30 in the morning once a month.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
so it's wonderful to be here. It's wonderful for you to be interested in what we're doing. And Ericksonian hypnosis is very well known around the world, although to my surprise, as I had been very steeped in that area, not known to everybody. Uh, he really is the father of a branch
Mm-hmm.
of hypnosis, that moving away from the directive, and to some extent even away from the directly suggestive type of hypnosis, into something that's much more client and therapist oriented, co-created.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
Erickson's principal student was a man named Ernest Rossi, who worked with him in the 1970s and produced with him and wrote most of the seminal texts
Mm-hmm.
that he had produced. And Ernest went there, and it's extraordinary the similarity of our stories. He went there with one of his books, gave it to Erickson, and Erickson was not particularly impressed. To my great pleasure, when I gave him my book, Ernie Rossi was extremely impressed and wrote a beautiful piece about it,
Nice.
which enabled me to move forward. And I became indebted to him. I then became his apprentice. It was much more than just a mentor. I was an apprentice, and after about 13 years of work with Ernest, he asked me if I would write the Mirroring Hands textbook with him. And then he said, off you go and write it. And so he beautifully allowed me to have my name first on the title. But it was a
Amazing.
long, long journey of learning a lot of stuff, because
Yeah.
Ernest was a very grand taskmaster.
Wow. So, when I was saying when I was talking, I was saying that you're very masterful, and I was kind of joking because we were joking about that. So you have three master's degrees on in different fields related to psychology and hypnosis. Is that correct?
Yes, I've done what Ernest was very pleased about, even though he realized that I was also strangling myself with the bureaucracy. But I followed what interested me, and I
Mm-hmm.
studied what interested me in order to expand myself. And
Yeah.
I found out that this is what Ernie called at the growing edge, to move beyond the growing edge. So I actually spent the first 25 years of my career as an actor and a singer and songwriter. And
Wow.
this was wonderful. And I had no idea that this was fantastic training for dealing with people, because I
Yeah.
learned to be people. I learned to be all kinds of people. I was the goody and the baddie. I was the murderer. I was the lover. And I realized how this was possible for people to have these changes. I was the traumatized. I was the madly in love. I was the negatively attached. I was the person with addiction. I was the person who couldn't give up. And this was great training. So it was in my mid-40s that I, unfortunately, as much as hard as I tried and wonderful opportunities and close nearlies, I decided I'd go back and study. I studied linguistics first because I talked a lot. It was very good. Then I went and studied a thing called social ecology as a master's degree, largely because Jeff Zeig at the Erickson Foundation said that if you want to speak here, you have to have a master's degree. So I'm Australian. And you just say, oh, okay, I'll go get one of them. Yeah. So I did. I went back. I came back a year later and said, I got one of those. And he said, oh, well, I guess you better speak here. And I've been speaking at the Erickson conferences ever since. But that was in social ecology, which is the human being in relation to the world, into the environment. Then education. And then I studied a brain and mind science degree, a master's degree. And people say, well, what's all that got to do with doing hypnosis or doing psychotherapy? What do you want to know all this biology and this background for? Well, I tell you what, if you're anywhere from your brain surgeon to your car mechanic, you would rather like them to know a lot about what's going on underneath the hood. And this is where Ernest Rossi was the perfect mentor. Ernest Rossi would say, oh, you know a lot about neuroscience. Now, how about genetics? And Ernest was the first one to talk about genes changing and genes being expressed because of hypnosis, because of positive psychotherapeutic action. And then in the last few years, and sadly, he died in 2020, but he said, oh, now we'll move on to quantum. And I know a lot of people talk about a lot of quantum, and a lot of people have a lot of talk that they should stop talking about. Yeah. But it is still incredibly interesting. Yet, once knowing that, what does a great jazz musician do when they improvise? Do they think about technique? No, not at all. Do they know their technique so well that they then don't have to think about it? Yes. And that is the difference between someone who delivers a product and someone who integrates and engages with a client utilizing what is best and most efficacious for the client at the time.
Yeah, awesome. So how did this mirroring hands thing appear? Like,
it's a really good question. It's a really good question because it sounds like mirroring hands. What are you talking about? In fact, Ernie sometimes feels that the process is almost a bit lumbered by that title. But it emerged, it grew, it developed, it evolved out of what was happening in the grand changes that were being made by Milton Erickson, who started out quite directive, quite trance-oriented, doing a lot of specific therapies for specific needs, quite responsive, but still very, very directive. And they would use the hands. He would have hand levitation. They would often use the hands in this, the mesmer type of version. You feel that magnetic pull, which is often used by people to see their hypnotizability. Yeah. And there was a fascinating change that occurred in what a process that Erickson called the basic accessing question, which was really, I mean, how do you know your client's ready to work? Well,
how do you know that?
Yeah, why not ask them? But don't ask their head. Their head doesn't know. Their head's saying, oh, yes, I'm really ready because I want to give up this smoking or I want to change my anxiety. But are their insides, that area within what we call the implicit, in the lower parts of the brain and in the body, is it ready? And so we used to use idiomotor stuff. That was the hand levitation. And David Cheek had the yes, no. And people still use that, or they might even use the two different hands. But again, it's coming from the therapist into the client. This is your yes finger, that's your no finger. Or we're going to do fingers. And what Erickson would say was, And when that part of you inside is ready to begin this important work, your hands will move together. Or he would say, your arm will begin to rise. And Ernie said, and Ernie, who was the pragmatist of the two, said, that's very sort of imposing. It puts a lot of pressure both on the client and on the therapist. I mean, what if the client doesn't do anything?
Yeah, I was going to say exactly that. We're like, what if you say that and the client's like, oh, bugger, nothing happens.
I'm not doing it. The same as people say, put your fingers together. Now, you can't pull your fingers apart. You cannot pull your fingers apart. Bink. Oh, well, you did. Oh, okay. So all these things, put the fingers together, put these ones, you can't pull them apart. So when the therapist instructs the client to do something and they don't do it, there's a quandary. So Ernie said, why not ask them? So when that part of you inside is ready to begin this important work, I wonder, will your hands begin to move together? And away they would go. Now, what Ernie then found was even that was too directive. Yeah. Will your hands begin to move? Period. Will they come towards each other? Will they move apart? Will they go up or down? Or will they stay quite still? The whole purpose of the exercise is not for the therapist to achieve some goal. It's for the client to come to their personal realization that something marvelous, something intriguing, something tremendous, what we call numinous, is happening. And certainly people are very impressed when they do things and their fingers don't come apart, or they told to sleep and they fall apart. It's very impressive and it's very effective, and there's amazing things you can do with it. But just imagine how powerful a position the client is in if their hands move together, if they find their hand rising or falling, if they find their eyes closing. You know, I've never asked a client to close their eyes, ever.
Awesome.
And if they don't close their eyes, then we don't worry about it, because no one said you had to or not had to.